Have you heard about lectins? I'm going to scooch this around a little bit. Okay. So lectins, we hear that they are the devil and you should avoid them at all cost. And I would like to give you a full picture. And if you think if you already have an opinion on lectins, I would really ask that you hang in there with me for a few minutes and just hear both sides of the story. So lectins are ubiquitous, meaning they're everywhere. They're in plants, they're in animals, they're in fungi, they're in bacteria. So it's not an unusual thing for an organism to have lectins and lectins to be in the food supply. Lectins are a protein, and the big thing you hear about them, which makes them sound scary, is that they're an anti-nutrient. So that doesn't sound good. And indeed, they can interfere with absorption and nutrients being processed. So that's where the anti comes from. But now be a bean. Be a bean for just a second and say you don't want to be eaten by a predator. So you make it such that if that predator tries to eat you, that little grasshopper tries to nibble on you, it gets sick, and then it tells all the other grasshoppers, which sounds kind of silly, but animals are very smart, and that is kind of how it happens. So these anti-nutrients, or these lectins, are things much like when we talk about GMO plants versus organic plants, and finding that organic plants have higher antioxidants in them. And what we understand how that happens is that the plant, because it doesn't have these genetically modified organisms, so that it's not being attacked by certain predators, and the fact that it doesn't have that protection from pesticides, it has to try harder. It has to fight back harder. And so in organic produce, that's why we recommend you eat it, is because it has this higher antioxidant profile. It's healthier for you because the plant had to work harder to make these antioxidants that actually repel predators. So the repelling doesn't sound good, but it's repelling predators, but the antioxidant increased production is really good for humans. So these lectins are similar in this fashion, that they're made to repel the predator, but when have you ever tried to eat a raw bean? And it sounds silly because you'd probably break a tooth before you'd get much off the bean, but the facts are that a lot of the studies that are incidents, we should call them, that are talked about with beans are when people ingested raw beans or undercooked beans. And so there was a famous Japanese event, which was 2015, not that long ago, but this TV station, radio station, recommended people grind up white kidney beans and ingest them, and people got sick. But also understand that the getting sick, nobody likes food poisoning, but it's that type of symptom. You can have nausea, you can have vomiting, you can have diarrhea, but the next day you're fine. And that's what they found. So sometimes the fear-mongering of lectins is a bit unfounded, because if you actually cook the food, you're not going to eat a wheat berry raw. You're not going to take your steel-cut oats and try to chew on them. I mean, we know better. You're not going to eat raw potatoes. It gives you a tummy ache. Your grandma told you these things, because food needs to be properly prepared. And so when the foods that are high in lectins, which I will go over that list in just a moment, when you cook them and you properly prepare them, the lectin amount goes down to almost nothing. So that anti-nutrient concern equally goes down to almost nothing. Now, that's not to say that you can't have, gluten, one of my favorite lectins, wrote a book on it, is a food that people can be highly sensitive to. They can have celiac disease, they can have gluten sensitivity. But it's not so much the lectin's fault as the gliadin within the wheat, and it could be wheat, rye, barley, so the glutinous grains have certain proteins that are inflammatory, etc. A different conversation. So whole grains have lectins. Legumes, beans, lentils have lectins. The family of nightshades, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplant, bell peppers have lectins. Nuts and seeds, beautiful food group, have lectins. So people have been scared away from these foods. And by the way, if you say, well, do you cook a nut? You don't have to cook the nut. They do not have high levels of lectins that have caused any problem. And there's a great study back from 2015. This was an NIH study. It was a randomized controlled trial, so that's the kind of study that is considered a very high standard of studies. And they looked at women who were obese. They gave them a diet of legumes 3 times a week, and then the other group had a diet that had 0 legumes in it, and they kept the study isocaloric, meaning the women were consuming the same amount of calories, so calories weren't different. The only thing that was different was the 3 servings of legumes per week versus no servings of legumes per week. And you hear about lectins being pro-inflammatory and causing weight gain. And what they found in this study is one of the common inflammatory markers we look at in patients' blood is called C-reactive protein. And it not only went down, it went down 40% just with 3 servings per week of legumes. But the women's blood pressure went down, their cholesterol went down, they lost weight. So that was that study sort of supporting that legumes are good for you. But hundreds of years of following humans around the planet and seeing the kind of diets associated with the highest longevity, the least amount of disease as far as cardiometabolic issues, dying from heart disease and stroke, diabetes and obesity, all these conditions we're trying to avoid and diseases we're trying to avoid. The people around the planet that consume the most lectins, meaning they have a diet high in nuts and seeds and high in legumes, they have a high fiber diet. That's the other thing associated with these foods, and whole unprocessed grains. We're not talking about white bread, we're talking about whole grains, leaving out gluten if you're gluten sensitive. These foods are very rich in fiber, they're rich in a lot of very important nutrients that are associated with longevity. They're not associated with death and disease. And that's the story that you're being fed about lectins. And it's really not supported. And so you just also look at just from a common sense standpoint. And someone said this recently, and I'm like, yeah, that makes so much sense, because Americans are known for the fact that about 7% of us get enough fiber. You know, we're not known for our high fiber diet. And we're also not known to consume whole grains, not the processed grains, but whole grains. We're not known for our seed intake. We're not known for our bean and legume intake. We're not known for that. So if that was what was killing us, then it would be a major part of our diet. Now, we do know that saturated fat and high sugar and high processed carbohydrates, we do see that correlation because we actually eat that, and it actually is killing us. I'm being a little dramatic, but not really. These are the things that are high in our diet that we're seeing linked to the diseases we don't want to get. So it doesn't even make sense to blame lectins for these problems that many Americans have when they don't really naturally consume lectins, okay? So a final point, if you're worried about beans, if you get beans in a can, which most of us do, some cultures rinse their beans overnight and they soak them, then rinse them, then pressure cook them or cook them in some fashion. It takes a very long time. I know I buy mine in a can, but as long as you can take a fork and you can press on the bean or you can press on the lentil and it easily squishes, technical term, then it's cooked enough that you have nothing to worry about with lectins. So I hope this helped. I hope some of you that have been worried about lectins and have been eschewing them 100% because you're so concerned about them can breathe a little sigh of relief, because although it's been very nicely marketed and publicized, the research does not support that lectins are dangerous. It truly does not. And they are a great source of nourishment, fiber, and again, the people who live the longest have diets very robust in beans and legumes and whole grains and nuts and seeds. So I hope you enjoyed this content. If you did, please give me a thumbs up so more people can see this and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you soon.